There are children who do not grow up with time. They grow up because they have no other choice. No one tells them that childhood has ended. No door slams shut. No announcement rings out. There is only one very quiet moment when that child realizes that if they do not become understanding, there will be no one left to keep everything steady. From that day on, they learn to stay silent when they want to cry, to smile when they are afraid, to take care of themselves when they should have been protected. But the most frightening thing is not that they mature too soon. The most frightening thing is that they begin to believe this is who they truly are. Through Carl Jung's lens, a child who grows up too quickly does not merely carry a psychological wound. They carry a mask created out of survival. Jung called it the persona, the face we present to the world in order to be accepted, in order not to be abandoned, in order not to become a burden. For a child, that mask may look like obedience, calmness, maturity, and being sensible. Adults call it strength, but the unconscious knows a deeper truth. Beneath that strength is a child who was never allowed to be weak. Beneath that calmness is a soul always standing guard. Beneath the sentence, "I'm fine," is a very small part still waiting for someone to ask again, "Are you really fine?" In this video, you will understand the psychology of a child who grew up too quickly, how they learned to stay silent when they needed to be heard, to be independent when they needed protection, and to remain calm while inside they were still full of confusion. Through the lens of Carl Jung, we will step into the unconscious place where that child is still waiting, carrying unnamed emotions and a childhood that was never fully lived. Stay until the end, because sometimes what you call strength is not your true nature, but the way a child once tried to protect their heart from breaking. Number 1. The mask of the overly understanding child. The overly understanding child does not usually begin with the desire to become perfect. It begins with a very quiet sensitivity. The child notices the tired look in the mother's eyes, the long silences of the father, the sighs at the dinner table, the tension hanging in the house that no one names. Children may not yet understand money, marriage, disappointment, or the wounds of adults. But they sense very quickly when love in the home becomes fragile, when one wrong sentence can make the air heavy, when their own tears can make someone even more exhausted. From very early on, that child learns to observe. They observe whether their mother is happy today, whether their father is angry, and whether the adults are calm enough to hear them speak. They learn to step softly, ask little, and want very little. Some needs are swallowed before they even become words, not because the child has no needs, but because they feel their needs may disturb someone else. And in one very quiet moment, their unconsciousness begins to form an answer. If I am better, quieter, easier to be around, maybe I will be safer. I know a friend named Tony. Tony is the kind of person everyone feels comfortable being around. He always arrives on time, always remembers small details about other people, and always knows what to say to make the atmosphere less awkward. In a group of friends, if someone is sad, Tony is the first to listen. If there is conflict, Tony tries to soothe it. If he is forgotten in some plan, he only smiles and says, "It's okay, everyone was busy." From the outside, Tony looks like a mature, kind, stable person. But once, when only the two of us were sitting in a coffee shop near closing time, he said very quietly, Sometimes I don't know what I really want anymore. I only know what other people need from me. Tony said that when he was young, the emotions of the adults in his home always took up more space than the emotions of the children. When his mother was sad, the whole house had to be silent. When his father was angry, everyone had to guess what not to say. No one ever taught Tony in words that he had to be understanding, but every reaction, every glance, every time the adults became tired of his tears, taught him that lesson. He learned that if he wanted to be loved, he should not make anyone more tired. If he wanted to stay close, he should not become a problem. If he wanted to be accepted, he had to become a version of himself that was easier to care for. And so Tony grew into someone very gentle with the world, but strangely distant from his own heart. From there, the first mask appears. It is not frightening like a lie. In the eyes of adults, it can even look beautiful. It is the mask of obedience, maturity, being sensible, and always being in control of oneself. That child does not cry for too long, does not demand too much, does not express anger too clearly, and does not make an already tense home even more tense. They know how to smile at the right time. They know how to say, "I'm fine," very quickly. They know how to put their sadness away in a private place, so no one else has to worry. Adults look at them and think, "What a strong child." But sometimes, what they call strength is only survival disguised very skillfully. Carl Jung once wrote, "The persona is a complicated system of relations between the individual consciousness and society. Fittingly enough, a kind of mask, designed on the one hand to make a definite impression upon others, and on the other, to conceal the true nature of the individual." In the case of children who become understanding too early, that mask is not only worn when they step out into society. It is worn inside the very first home of their life. It not only hides their true nature from strangers, it also hides fear, anger, loneliness, and the need to be held from the very people who should have seen them. You can imagine that mask like a glass bell placed over a small candle. From the outside, the candle is still burning. The light is gentle, steady, and beautiful. Others look at it and feel reassured because it does not flare up, does not make smoke, and does not burn anyone's hand. But inside that glass bell, the candle is slowly running out of oxygen. The overly understanding child is the same. They still smile, still study well, still behave, still know how to conduct themselves. But the most alive part inside them, the part that knows how to want, to be angry, to ask, to be innocent, does not have enough room to breathe. And the heartbreaking thing is that no one thinks the glass bell is a problem, because it is transparent, because it is beautiful, because it makes the candle look safer. Adults often see only an obedient child, not the life force being held back inside. They see silence, but they do not hear how many questions have been swallowed. They see obedience, but they do not know how many times the child has rejected their own emotions to keep someone else from feeling uncomfortable. They see a calm face, but they do not realize that this calmness sometimes does not come from peace, but from having learned too well how not to disturb anyone. The mask of the overly understanding child is dangerous because it is often rewarded. The quieter they are, the more they are praised for being good. The more they endure, the more they are called mature. The less they ask for, the more reassured the adults feel. But when those compliments are placed on a child too early, they can become an invisible contract. You are lovable only when you do not cause trouble. You are recognized only when you do not need too much. You are safe only when you know how to hide the difficult, stubborn, weak, and chaotic parts of yourself. From there, the child not only learns how to behave, they learn how to censor their own soul. Over time, the child no longer feels that they are wearing a mask. They think it is their real face. They do not think, "I am trying to please everyone." They only feel anxious when someone is disappointed. They do not think, "I am hiding my needs." They only feel ashamed whenever they want to be cared for. They do not think, "I am abandoning myself." They only feel familiar with standing behind the emotions of others. This is the most subtle tragedy of the persona. When a role is played for long enough, the one performing forgets that there was once another life beneath that role. That is why the overly understanding child, when grown, often carries a kind of peace that is hard to name. They are not necessarily loud in their pain. They may work well, behave beautifully, love sincerely, and take responsibility for others. But somewhere inside them, there remains a small region that keeps asking, "Will I still be loved if I am no longer this easy to be around?" That question is not a weakness. It is the trace of a child who once learned that love had to be preserved by making themselves smaller. That mask, then, does not need to be hated. It once protected a small soul during years when there seemed to be no other way. It helped that child pass through tense rooms, silent meals, days when they were not old enough to understand, but were already sensitive enough to hurt. But a life cannot be built only from survival. At some point, we must gently realize that we were not born merely to put other people at ease. Beneath the overly understanding child, there is still a real person. A person who has the right to want, to be sad, to be angry, to need love without having to perform goodness perfectly. And perhaps the first step is not to throw the mask away, but to touch it with gratitude, then slowly learn how to live without disappearing from ourselves anymore. Number 2. When childhood ends too early. And after the mask of the overly understanding child, we begin to see something quieter, deeper. Not every child is allowed to grow according to the natural rhythm of their own life. There are children who are still young in age, but inside have already been pushed into a world too vast, too heavy, too adult. Their childhood does not end with a loud noise. It often ends very softly. One day, the child no longer runs to adults to be comforted, because they realize the adults are tired too. One day, they stop asking too many questions, because they feel their questions may trouble someone further. One day, they stop believing they can be lifted out of fear, and begin learning how to stand alone inside that fear. When childhood ends too early, what is lost is not only a few games, a few innocent afternoons, a few times of crying without shame. What is lost is the fundamental feeling that one is allowed to be a child. Allowed not to understand everything, allowed to be clumsy, allowed to need adults, allowed to be sad over small things without being told they are overreacting. A child should have been allowed to live in a world of questions, imagination, mischief, and very young sorrows. But when the life around them is too unstable, they are pulled out of that world too soon, like someone being awakened in the middle of the night and forced to guard the entire house. In Patrick Ness's novel, A Monster Calls, there is a boy named Connor who lives with the fear of losing his mother to illness. He is still a child, but his inner world is no longer as light as a child's world should be. Night after night, a monster appears, not only to frighten him, but to force him to face a truth he does not dare to speak. What haunts the story is not the monster, but the fact that Connor has to carry emotions far too large for his age. Love, anger, fear, guilt, and helplessness. He is not only afraid of losing his mother, he is also afraid of the hidden thoughts inside himself. And that is one of the quietest tragedies of a child forced to grow up too soon. They do not have enough childhood to contain all their pain. In real life, not every child has a monster come to name the truth for them. Some children have to become mediators in their parents' arguments. Some children become the place where their mother pours out her sadness. Some children have to take care of younger siblings, prepare their own meals, read the faces of adults, and teach themselves not to create more trouble. From the outside, these things may sometimes look normal, even be called good, capable, sensible. But in the inner world, this is a reversal of roles. The child is no longer standing in the place of the one who needs protection. They are pushed into the place of the one who must understand, must endure, must keep everything from collapsing. Carl Jung once wrote, "In every adult there lurks a child, an eternal child, something that is always becoming, is never completed, and calls for unceasing care, attention, and education." When childhood ends too early, that childlike part does not disappear. It is only left behind in a very deep room of the soul. On the outside, the person still grows up, still goes to school, goes to work, falls in love, carries responsibilities, speaks very adult sentences. But inside, there is a part that remains frozen at the moment it realized it was no longer allowed to be childlike. And that part does not need judgment. It needs to be recognized. You can imagine childhood as a garden that needs enough seasons to grow. There is a season for sowing seeds, a rainy season, a season of sunlight, a season when the trees are still weak, a season when the flowers have not yet bloomed. A child needs such seasons too. They need time to play, to make mistakes, to be comforted, to ask innocent questions, to believe that there is an adult standing behind them. But when childhood ends too early, that garden is turned into a storage room. Everything still exists, but it no longer grows in a natural way. Flowers are cut before they bloom. The soil is pressed down so boxes of responsibility can be placed on top of it. Adults may look in and see neatness, usefulness, order. But deep below, the seeds that were never allowed to fully live still lie there, not dead, only waiting for a safer season to rise. From a psychological perspective, when a child has to mature too early, the energy meant for development is redirected towards survival. Instead of exploring what they like, they learn to recognize what others need. Instead of asking, "Who am I?" they ask, "What must I do so everyone will be okay?" Instead of being supported by the adult world, they try to become a small pillar, holding up a roof that is far too heavy. And because a child can never truly carry the role of an adult, they often grow up with a feeling that is hard to name. They may be capable of many things on the outside, but inside, they always feel as if they lack a place to lean. The most subtle thing is that those who lost their childhood early often do not realize what they have lost, because they do not have another childhood to compare it with. They only think they are naturally more serious, deeper, less cheerful, less able to relax. They look at others laughing freely and find it unfamiliar, even slightly dangerous. They do not know that inside them there is no lack of the capacity for joy. That capacity was simply folded away too soon, like a letter put into a drawer before it could be read. Many years later, when someone opens that drawer, emotions may rush out without order. Sadness, anger, regret, confusion, and a deep tenderness for their younger self. So when we speak of childhood ending too early, we are not only speaking about the past, we are speaking about the way that the past continues to live in the present. It appears in the moment when a person does not know how to enjoy life without guilt. In this way, they tense up when someone else is sad, in the feeling that they must immediately become mature whenever conflict arises. In this way, they find it hard to believe they can be loved even when they are not useful, not perfectly in control, not understanding, not a support for anyone. A childhood that ends too early does not take away a person's entire life, but it makes them enter life with a heaviness they were never asked whether they wanted to carry. What you need to do is begin returning to yourself a very small piece of the right to be childlike. It does not have to be anything grand. Choose one simple action that your younger self once needed, but did not have enough of. Rest for 10 minutes without blaming yourself. Eat something you like without needing a reason. Write down one real emotion without editing it into something beautiful. Place a hand on your chest and whisper, "I do not have to brace myself immediately now." These small things do not change the past, but they open a door again. They say to the child within, "This place is less dangerous now. You do not have to keep standing guard forever." If, while listening to this, a memory quietly stirs inside you, share your story gently. Even just a few lines are enough. You do not have to explain everything, and you do not have to make your pain understandable to anyone. Sometimes one honest sentence can open a very tender space where the childlike part that once stayed silent within you is heard, and where those who have walked through a similar feeling realize that they are not alone on the journey of finding again the years they were never allowed to fully live. Number 3. The child buried in the unconscious. The moment childhood ends too early does not only leave sadness in memory, it also leaves behind a childlike part pushed very deep down, where people can no longer see it with reason, but can still feel it through the smallest reactions in daily life. That child does not disappear. It only learns to stay silent. It no longer runs out crying, no longer asks to be held, no longer asks why it hurts. It retreats inward, sitting in a very hidden corner of the soul, carrying emotions that have never been named. And then the person grows up, thinking they have passed through it all, until one day, a sentence, a look, or a certain silence touches exactly the place where that child still remains. The unconscious, in Jung's view, is not a dead darkness. It is like a living realm beneath consciousness, where the things we have not been able to understand, endure, or express continue to exist. There are memories we no longer remember clearly, but the body still remembers. There are emotions we thought we had forgotten, but they still find their way back in a very ordinary moment. A message left unanswered, a loved one saying, "It's up to you," in a voice that has gone cold. Someone was sighing in front of us. Reason may say, "This is nothing serious." But inside, a very old part has already contracted before we can understand why. A follower of the channel once left a comment sharing, "I have a habit of apologizing even when I do not know what I did wrong. Once my partner was only quiet because he was tired after work, but my heart immediately started racing and my mind began thinking of everything. Did I say something wrong? Is he tired of me? Am I bothering someone again? Later, I realized that this feeling did not begin in my current relationship. It was exactly like how I felt as a child. Whenever someone in the house went silent, I had to guess what I needed to do to make everything normal again. That comment was not loud, but it was very real. Because many people live like that too, they may not remember a specific scene, but they remember the feeling of always having to prepare for love to be withdrawn at any moment. That is how the child buried in the unconscious speaks, not through clear words, but through reactions faster than thought. Before we can analyze, we already want to explain. Before we can ask what happened, we already want to fix our mistake. Before we know whether the other person is truly angry, the body has already entered a defensive state. Some adults think they are too sensitive, too anxious, too easily unsettled. But sometimes they are not too anything. They are only carrying within them an alarm system built very early, when their safety depended on reading other people's emotions before those emotions erupted. Carl Jung once wrote, "The psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside, as fate. The parts that have not become conscious do not lie still in the dark. They often return through choices, reactions, and relationships we think are random. An unnamed fear can make us constantly defensive. An unseen wound can make us keep stepping into familiar situations, even when they are painful. Not because we want to repeat the past, but because the soul is still searching for a chance for what was once forgotten to finally be recognized." You can imagine the child buried in the unconscious as an old music box stored in the deepest floor of a house. Many years pass, and we think we have forgotten it. On the upper floors, life continues. Work, responsibilities, meetings, relationships, new roles. But all it takes is one sound resembling the past, and the box opens by itself, playing the old melody again. The strange thing is that the melody does not need to be loud. A slightly cold sentence, a door closed hard, a delay, a disappointed look, any of these can be enough to make it ring. We think we are reacting to the present, but in truth, inside us, an old song has been turned on from a very deep place. And because that song is so old, we often do not know what to do with it. We may feel ashamed because our reaction is too strong. We may blame ourselves for overthinking. We may try to act normal, then become exhausted afterward from holding too much in. But from Jung's perspective, those moments are not only disturbances, they are signs. They tell us that some part of us has not yet been met again. A child who once feared silence. A child who once felt guilty when adults were sad. A child who once had to guess the world instead of having the world explained to them. When that part rises, it does not come to ruin our present life. It comes because we are finally old enough to listen to what we could not hear back then. The most painful thing is that this child is often misunderstood by the very person who carries it. Whenever we are afraid, we call ourselves troublesome. Whenever it needs reassurance, we call ourselves weak. Whenever it wants to be asked about and cared for, we think we are too demanding. We continue doing to ourselves what the world once did to us, telling that emotion to be quiet, telling that need to become smaller, telling that fear not to exaggerate. But the more it is pushed down, the more it tries to return. The unconscious does not disappear simply because we refuse to look at it. It is like underground water. If there is no healthy current, it will seep through other cracks. The child buried in the unconscious does not only hold pain, it also holds the living parts that were once left behind, innocent trust, the ability to feel joy over something small, the wish to be held without having to prove oneself worthy, laughter that does not need to be controlled, curiosity that is not criticized as annoying. When we bury that child, we do not only bury tears, we also bury its light. That is why some adults are not exactly sad, yet life always feels distant to them. They still do their work well, still love others, still take responsibility, but joy struggles to reach all the way inside. It is as if there is always a thin layer of glass between them and life. They can see it, understand it, but cannot fully touch it. The journey Jung called becoming oneself does not begin by forcing ourselves to be stronger. It begins by bringing consciousness down into the places we once abandoned. Not so we can live forever in the past, but so the past no longer lives through us in silence. When an old reaction appears, instead of rushing to scold ourselves, we can pause for a moment and recognize, perhaps this is not only about today. Perhaps a very small part of me is remembering an old feeling. Just by naming it this way, we create a gentle distance between the present and the past. We are no longer completely swept away. We begin to stand beside that child, instead of leaving it alone at the wheel. And perhaps, when we touch that unconscious part, we will realize something very tender. Not every old reaction needs to be fixed immediately. Some things first need only to be understood. That child does not return to make you weaker, but because it has waited so long to be seen. Each time you recognize an old insecurity without rushing to blame yourself, you are bringing light closer to a place once forgotten. And when that childlike part is seen with eyes that do not judge, it can slowly return to its proper place, no longer a silent fate controlling your life, but a fragment of memory finally held in your arms. Number 4. The strength born from lack of safety. So what happens when the childlike part buried deep inside has never truly been touched? It does not simply lie still in the darkness. It learns to protect itself. And sometimes, what we call strength in an adult begins from the very place that once lacked safety. There is a kind of strength that is not born from having been fully loved, but from having had to hold oneself up too early. There is a kind of calm that does not come from peace, but from one's understanding that if one panicked, there would be no one left to keep everything together. There is a kind of independence that does not mean a person needs no one, but means that long ago, whenever they needed someone, they had to learn to swallow disappointment by themselves. This strength is often very easy to admire. People see that you do not collapse easily, do not complain much, do not let emotions disturb what needs to be done. You know how to take care of yourself, decide for yourself, get up by yourself, and find your own way forward. When something happens, you can become very clear, very quick, very effective. You are the one who restores order when everything becomes chaotic. The one who says, "It's okay," even when you are already tired inside. The one others seek when they need something to lean on. But sometimes, after all those compliments, You only want someone to look closely and ask, "Since when did you have to be this strong?" In Greek mythology, Atalanta is a very striking image of this kind of strength. She was born a princess, but because her father wanted a son, Atalanta was left on a mountain as an infant. According to the myth, she was raised by a female bear, then grew up among the mountains and forests, and became a swift, courageous huntress, whom almost no one could catch. People often speak of Atalanta as a symbol of the extraordinary. But if we look through psychological eyes, we can also see another layer of meaning. Some people become exceptional, not because life was gentle with them, but because from the very beginning, they were placed somewhere that did not allow them to become weak. Atalanta did not grow up in the tenderness of a palace. She grew up in the forest, where everything required instinct, speed, and the ability to protect herself. If she was slow, she might not survive. If she was soft, she might be devoured. And so Atalanta's strength is both beautiful and sad. Beautiful because it shows the strange adaptability of human life. Sad because we understand that some radiant qualities are forged from a very deep deprivation. A person may become capable, sharp, calm, resilient, but at the deepest level, they may still be carrying the first question of their life. Why did I have to learn to survive on my own so early? Carl Jung once wrote, "Where love rules, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, their love is lacking. One is the shadow of the other." When a child does not feel loved in safety, they may begin to seek a very quiet form of power, the power to control themselves, to control their emotions, to control their needs, to control the situation so they will not be hurt again. Where love should have been the foundation, the child has to build control in order to stand. Where there should have been an embrace, they learn to turn themselves into a wall. From a scientific perspective, this is not hard to understand. When a child lives in an unsafe environment, the nervous system does not truly rest. It learns to place survival before innocence. Instead of relaxing to play, to be curious, to explore, it constantly scans the environment for signs of danger, a change in tone, a tense expression, a door shutting hard, an unusual silence. Over time, that state of vigilance becomes familiar. The person may grow up highly capable, but inside there is still a small alarm bell that never completely stops ringing. You can imagine this strength as a tree growing on the side of a cliff. From a distance, it is astonishing. Its trunk bends but does not break. Its roots cling deep into tiny cracks. Its leaves still open to the wind, even though there is almost no soft soil around it. People pass by and admire it. What a resilient tree. But few ask, if it had grown in a garden with moist soil, rain in season, and enough open sky, would it have needed to twist itself so hard just to exist? Strength born from lack of safety is the same. It is beautiful, but not light. It is worthy of respect, but it should not be romanticized as though pain were necessary for a human being to have value. Because when strength is built from lack of safety, people often do not know when they are allowed to soften. They may handle crises very well, yet feel confused by gentleness. They may endure for a very long time, yet not know how to say, "I need help." They may be a source of support for many people, yet feel disoriented when someone tries to support them. Not because they are cold, not because they do not know how to love, but because in their deepest experience, needing someone once came with risk. Need could lead to disappointment. Trust could lead to hurt. Leaning on someone could make them fall again. That is why many people who lack safety try even harder to appear as if they need nothing at all. They say, "I'm fine," very quickly. They are used to solving everything themselves before anyone else has a chance to step in. They do not want to become a burden, do not want anyone to see their fragile parts, and do not want to place their needs in someone else's hands. These things sound like strength, but sometimes they are also a wall. They help the person avoid rejection too directly, but they also make it harder for love to enter deeply, because no one can truly be supported if they spend their whole life allowing others to see only the version of themselves that has already learned to stand alone. From Jung's view, the important thing is not to deny this strength. This strength once saved a very real part of you. It is proof that the soul found a way to survive when life was not gentle enough. But if we identify completely with it, we will begin to believe that we are worthy of respect only when we need no one, worthy of love only when we do not weaken, safe only when we control everything well. Then strength is no longer a quality. It becomes armor worn even in sleep. And armor, no matter how finely forged, can never replace skin. Perhaps maturity is not about becoming harder forever. Maturity is being subtle enough to distinguish between true strength and fear pretending to be strength. True strength gives us the ability to stand firm, but still allows us to sit down when we are tired. True strength helps us care for ourselves, but does not force us to refuse every hand offered to us. True strength does not need to prove that it is not in pain. It simply says gently, "I once had to brace myself in order to survive, but now I can learn another way of living, softer, truer, more human." If this part touches a very deep place in you, share your feeling with one gentle sentence. It may be only, "I have been strong for too long." You do not need to explain more, and you do not need to make that feeling complete. Sometimes, simply speaking it in a space gentle enough allows the part of you that once had to brace itself to breathe a little more easily, as if at last someone has recognized that behind that resilience is a heart that has been tired for a very long time. Number 5. The shadow behind calmness. When a person has been used to being strong for too long, their calmness sometimes becomes the thing that reassures others most, but also the place where they most easily lose themselves. Not every silence is peace. Not every slight smile means nothing hurts. There are people who move through conflict with a very composed face, speak in a very soft voice, respond with restraint, make no one uncomfortable, and do not make the room heavier. They are like still water on a windless day. But at a deeper level, there may be many currents that have been forced underground. There is a kind of calm born from true understanding. It happens when a person recognizes their emotions, knows they are angry, sad, wounded, yet still chooses a response that is kind enough. That calm has its roots in consciousness. It does not deny the wave, it simply does not let the wave drown everything. But there is another kind of calm, more hidden and sadder. It is the calm of someone who once learned that their emotions were not welcome. If they were angry, they might be seen as disrespectful. If they were sad, they might be called weak. If they were disappointed, they might be told they were overreacting. And so they are not truly calm. They are only very skilled at disappearing from their own emotions. During a weekend coffee meeting, I happened to meet an old colleague named Nick. It had been a long time since we had last met, but he was still the same. A neat shirt, a slow voice, a smile just enough. A way of listening that made the person across from him feel as if everything inside him was fine. We talked about work, old acquaintances, and a few changes in life. At one point, Nick's phone lit up. He looked at the screen, went silent for a few seconds, then turned the phone face down on the table. Still in a very normal voice, he said, "It's nothing." But his hand tightened slightly around the coffee cup, long enough for me to realize that something had just touched him. A little later, Nick said it was a message from his family. Only a few short sentences, nothing too serious from the outside. But there was a familiar kind of reproach in them, the kind that made him immediately feel he had to explain, soothe, and prove that he was not uncaring. He smiled lightly and said, "What I'm best at is staying calm. But sometimes I don't know whether I am truly calm or only postponing my emotions until no one can see them." That sentence stayed with me for a long time, because it did not sound like a complaint. It sounded like a truth, spoken after many years of living too politely with his own pain. That is what many calm people experience. They do not react at the moment they are touched. They know how to change the subject, keep their voice light, smile at the right time, act as if everything is still under control. But emotions do not dissolve because of that. They only take another path, quieter, lonelier. At night, when there is no one in front of them for whom they must behave, the things held back begin to return, delayed anger, unnamed hurt, the answer they should have spoken that afternoon. And then they wonder why they are so tired when the whole day did not seem to contain anything especially large. In Jungian psychology, the shadow is not only the evil part of human beings. It is everything we have had to push out of the image we believe is acceptable. For a person who always tries to remain calm, the shadow may be suppressed anger, an unspoken protest, a healthy selfishness that has never been lived, the need to be defended, to be heard, to say no without fearing being seen as difficult. The shadow does not appear in order to make us bad people. It appears because inside us there are very human parts that have been stored away for too long. Carl Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." A person does not become whole simply by forever preserving the image of being kind, easygoing, and composed. Wholeness begins when we are brave enough to look at the emotions we once found unacceptable: anger, jealousy, hurt, irritation, the wish to leave, to refuse, to put ourselves first for once. Not so we can release them blindly, but so they no longer control us from behind. The shadow behind calmness usually grows very slowly. Every time we say, "It's fine," when it is not fine at all, one part of our emotion is pushed down. Every time we laugh off something that hurts us, one part of the truth is left behind. Every time we tell ourselves, "Don't be angry, don't make things complicated, don't make others uncomfortable," we place another fragment of ourselves into the dark. At first, this may seem to keep things peaceful, but later, that peace begins to resemble a room with all the windows closed. Outside, everything looks neat. Inside, the air gradually becomes suffocating. You can imagine this calmness as a beautiful porcelain vase placed in the living room. Its surface is bright and smooth, with no visible crack under the light. Everyone passing by thinks the vase is perfect, elegant, reliable. But inside, Water has been poured into it too many times without anyone emptying it. A drop of sadness, a drop of anger, a drop of disappointment, a drop of being overlooked. The vase still stands still because it has learned how to stand still. But standing still does not mean it is not full. And one day, just one very small drop may make the water overflow. Outsiders will be surprised. Why such a big reaction over something so small? They do not know that it was not only the final drop. It was all the water that had been held inside for too long. That is why the shadow is not always frightening. Sometimes it is locked away by life force. Anger may be protecting a boundary. Discomfort may be signaling that something is unfair. Hurt may be saying that we have given too much without ever being seen. If we keep calling these emotions bad, we continue cutting ourselves off from the instinct that knows how to protect life. What needs to be done is not to let anger take the wheel, nor to imprison it forever. What needs to be done is to slow down enough to hear what it is trying to say. Perhaps the gentlest thing we can do for ourselves is stop confusing calmness with the need to always be pleasant. You do not need to become a storm to prove that you have been hurt. But you also do not need to become a beautiful porcelain vase just to hold forever the things that were never spoken. The shadow behind calmness does not come to take away your composure. It comes to return a truer foundation to that composure, where emotions are recognized, boundaries are respected, and kindness no longer has to be paid for by silencing yourself. What you need to do is begin with one very small moment. The next time you automatically say, "It's fine," give yourself one breath before stepping over that emotion. You do not need to analyze too much, and you do not need to say everything out loud immediately. Simply acknowledge silently, "There is a part of me that is sad," or "There is a part of me that is angry." That acknowledgement does not make you weak. It only opens a very small door for the part hidden in the dark to step into consciousness. And from there, your calmness is no longer a place where emotions are buried, but becomes a space wide enough for you to live more truthfully with yourself. Number 6. The soul that must always observe others. If the shadow behind calmness is made of emotions held back for too long, then in front of that calmness, there is often a pair of eyes that must always observe. There are people who enter a room not to be present, but to read. They read other people's voices, facial expressions, silences, and the distance between two sentences. They recognize who is uncomfortable before that person says anything. They feel the atmosphere shift through nothing more than a sigh. They know when to speak less, when to smile, when to withdraw, and when to soften everything. Outsiders may call this sensitivity, but sometimes that sensitivity does not come from ease. It comes from a soul that once had to learn how to observe in order to stay safe. After that weekend coffee meeting, I saw Nick a few more times in very ordinary situations. Once, we attended a small meeting with a few former colleagues. While everyone was talking, I noticed that Nick seemed to miss almost nothing. He knew who had just felt uncomfortable after being interrupted. He knew who was trying to appear cheerful, even though their voice had already become slightly tense. He knew when the conversation was about to become strained, and he always found a way to step in with a light joke, a change of subject, or a glass of water offered at just the right moment. From the outside, Nick seemed very skillful, but the more closely I watched, the more I felt that this was not merely a social skill. It resembled a kind of vigilance that had sunk deep into the body. After the meeting, Nick said very quietly, "What tires me most is not talking to people. What tires me is having to know what everyone is feeling all the time." That sentence helped me understand that some people do not only live their own lives, they also silently live inside the emotions of those around them. They do not wait for others to speak before reacting. They guess in advance, adjust in advance, and shrink themselves in advance. It is as if there is a small guard inside them, standing at the doorway of the soul, constantly looking outward to see whether the world is dangerous today. A soul that must always observe others is often formed in emotionally unpredictable environments. When a child does not know when adults will become angry, when the house will fall silent, or when an ordinary sentence might turn into conflict, that child is forced to develop an extremely sharp intuition. They learn to recognize signs before the storm arrives. A gaze colder than usual, a chair pulled too hard, a door is closing in a way that does not sound normal, a sentence like, "Nothing is wrong," but spoken in a heavy voice. Gradually, the child does not only hear words, they hear what lies behind the words, and that follows them into adulthood. Carl Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." This does not speak only of irritation. It also opens a doorway through which we can look again at the way we react to other people. Sometimes what we observe too intensely in others is the trace of an insecure place within ourselves. A slight change in someone's expression may make us feel we are about to be blamed. Silence may make us believe that love is being withdrawn. Someone not replying immediately may throw us into the feeling of being left behind. The person before us may not have done anything to us, yet the unconscious has already built an old story. You can imagine such a soul as a house with too many windows open to the street. From the outside, the house looks bright, airy, and sensitive to every movement. But the person living inside almost never gets to rest. A footstep outside the gate makes them turn their head. A shadow passing by makes them wonder whether something is about to happen. Every window helps them see the world, but it also leaves them without a truly private corner where they can relax. The person who always observes others is the same. They understand the emotions around them very quickly, but sometimes they can no longer hear their own emotions clearly. The subtle thing is that this ability to observe once helped them survive, but as they grow up, it silently becomes a burden. They enter a conversation and automatically measure the emotional temperature of everyone present, who is sad, who is uncomfortable, who needs to be soothed. But because they are so quick with other people's emotions, they are slow with their own. They know when the room has changed, but they do not know when their own heart first grew tired. They are present in the moment, but their nervous system still feels as though it is working a night shift that never ends. And the quiet cost of a soul that is always turned outward is that it gradually loses the path back inward. The difference between empathy and vigilance lies in the feeling inside. Empathy brings us closer to others while still allowing us to remain within ourselves. Vigilance pulls us out of ourselves and into the emotions of others. Empathy has softness. Vigilance has tension. Empathy allows us to listen and then choose. Vigilance forces us to react before we know what we want. A person who once lacked safety often confuses these two things because both make them very skilled at recognizing the emotions around them. But only empathy leaves warmth behind. Vigilance usually leaves exhaustion. Perhaps Nick came to understand this at some point too. He said that after many years of constantly trying to guess other people's moods, he began practicing something very small. In every conversation, he would occasionally ask himself silently, "What am I feeling in my body?" Not, "What is the other person thinking?" Not, "What should I say to make them feel more comfortable?" But simply, "Are my shoulders tense? Am I holding my breath? Do I really want to stay in this conversation?" These questions were small, but for someone who had grown used to living outside himself, they were like the first stones laid down to rebuild the road back home. The most meaningful thing in this part is to recognize this. Your sensitivity is not wrong. The ability to read other people's emotions is not something that must be eliminated. It can be a beautiful quality, a form of deep emotional intelligence. But it needs to be placed where it belongs. You were not born to become the guardian of the whole world's moods. You do not need to turn every expression on someone else's face into your responsibility. You can notice that someone is sad without immediately having to fix it. You can see someone being silent without rushing to conclude that you are at fault. You can feel the room growing heavy and still keep part of your soul with yourself. A small suggestion for this part is this. Whenever you notice that you are observing others too much, gently bring your attention back to something real in your body. Your feet are touching the ground. Your breath is moving in, where your hands are resting. Then remind yourself silently, "I am allowed to be inside myself." That single sentence is enough to create a gentle distance between you and other people's emotions. And when the soul no longer has to keep looking outward to find safety, it begins to relearn something that seems simple, but is very deep. How to be present in your own life before trying to understand the whole world around you. Number 7. When rest also feels like guilt. Have you noticed that after a long time of always observing others, many people begin to forget what it feels like to rest without feeling wrong? When the mind has grown used to looking outward to guess emotions, anticipate reactions, and keep everything peaceful, even when nothing is happening, the body still finds it hard to believe that it is allowed to relax. A quiet afternoon may not bring peace, but restlessness. A day of doing nothing may not feel like a gift, but like a mistake. That person sits down to rest, yet inside there is a very small voice reminding them, "You should be doing something. You must not waste time like this." The guilt that appears around rest does not usually come out of nowhere. It is formed through years of learning that one's value lies in being useful, sensible, hard-working, enduring, and always ready. When a child is praised only when they are good, capable, self-sufficient, and not troublesome, it is very easy for them to grow up believing they are worthy of love only when they are doing something right. Rest, then, is no longer a natural need of the body. It becomes a frightening, empty space where a person no longer has anything with which to prove that they still have value. Perhaps on a very ordinary weekend evening, you have worked all week, answered almost all your messages, cleaned the house, and tried hard enough that you can finally lie down. You make a cup of warm water, turn on a gentle film, and tell yourself that tonight you will rest. But after only a few minutes, your eyes are no longer watching the screen. In your mind, unfinished tasks begin to appear. An email not yet answered, a call not yet returned, a plan not yet completed, a goal still left hanging. The film is still playing, the room is still quiet, but inside you have already left that moment of rest. You pick up your phone, check a little more, fix one small thing, then convince yourself that once it is done, you will feel lighter. But the more you do, the further relief moves away. That is a typical example of how rest does not only depend on free time, but on inner permission. The strange thing is that no one is blaming you. No one is entering the room and saying you are lazy. No one is demanding that you be perfect at this moment. But inside you, there is already an invisible supervisor standing there with a small notebook, recording everything that is not enough, not finished, not good enough. So rest is no longer rest. It becomes a silent courtroom where you have to defend your right to stop. And if you do not have a reason convincing enough, such as being completely exhausted, very ill, or unable to continue, you feel that you are still not allowed to relax. Some people do not work out of passion, but work to escape the feeling that they are useless. They are not busy because it is truly necessary, but because busyness helps them avoid facing an emptiness inside. When their schedule is full, they feel safer. When there is something to do, they know they are playing a role. But when everything stops, when the phone goes silent, when the room becomes quiet, when no one needs them immediately, a very old feeling may rise. If I am not doing anything, am I still worthy of remaining in love? From Jung's perspective, guilt around rest is not only a habit of working too much, it also shows that the ego has identified too deeply with the role of the useful one, the responsible one, the one who must always try. When a person only sees their value while they are doing something, the part that needs peace, play, and relaxation is pushed into the shadows, and the more that part is denied, the more unfamiliar it becomes. So rest is not only stopping work. For many people, it is the moment they have to face a very deep question. If I no longer do anything to prove my worth, am I still allowed to exist peacefully? Carl Jung once wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." For someone who is used to looking outward to guess other people's needs, expectations, and emotions, turning inward can feel very strange. They know what is unfinished, who needs them, what still requires more effort, but they cannot hear clearly how tired their own body has become. Only when they stop and look into their own heart do they begin to recognize a simple truth. I cannot live forever on duty alone. The body needs rest, the soul needs quiet, and a person does not need to be exhausted before they have the right to stop. You can imagine the guilt around rest as an old clock wound too tightly. It still runs, even runs very evenly and accurately, making everyone believe it is fine. But inside, the spring has been tightened to the point where there is no softness left. If you keep winding it further, the clock does not become better. It only wears down from within. Human beings are the same. A person may function very well, complete many tasks, meet many expectations, and always be present when others need them. But if they are never allowed to relax, that precision will become exhaustion. And sometimes what we call discipline is only a fear-based mechanism being rewarded by society. In Jung's view, a person cannot become whole if they live only through one side of themselves. If we identify only with the responsible part, the useful part, the hard-working part, the part that always tries, then the part that needs to play, sleep, be quiet, and be healthily unproductive will be pushed into the shadows. And when that part is denied for too long, it does not disappear. It may return as discouragement, resistance, loss of inspiration, prolonged fatigue, or the feeling of no longer wanting to do anything at all. That is not always a weakness. Sometimes, it is the late voice of a part of the soul that has been made to work for too long and has never been asked, "Are you tired?" True rest is not a reward after you have performed well enough. It is a condition that allows you to keep living in a more human way. A tree does not need to bear fruit through all 4 seasons to prove it deserves to stand in the garden. There is a season when it blooms, a season when it sheds its leaves, a season when it is silent beneath the earth, quietly nourishing its roots. No one calls the tree lazy when it does not bloom in winter. Only human beings, because they are so used to measuring worth by productivity, blame themselves in the very seasons when they most need recovery. The subtle thing is that people who feel guilty when they rest usually do not need more advice telling them to work harder. They have already worked hard for too long. What they need is to relearn a very basic feeling. I still have value even when I am not doing anything special. I am still worthy of love on a slow day. I am still a whole human being when my inbox has not been fully answered, the room has not been tidied, the plan is not perfect, and my energy has run out. Rest does not take your value away. It returns you to your real body, where all living things need the rhythm of breathing in and breathing out. What you need to do is begin with a pause so small that the mind can hardly object to it. 5 minutes without holding your phone. A cup of tea is sipped slowly, without using that time to do something else. An evening when you allow yourself to sleep early without calling it laziness. When guilt appears, do not rush to believe it completely. Simply say silently, "I am learning to rest without apologizing." That sentence is very small, but if repeated with enough gentleness, it can become a new doorway. Because one day you will understand that rest is not a betrayal of responsibility. Rest is the way you keep faith with the life inside you. Thank you for staying through half of this journey. Before continuing, give your heart a small pause. There is no need to rush into arranging your emotions, and no need to name exactly what is moving inside you. Simply let yourself slow down a little, as if after so many years of having to walk quickly, you are finally allowed to sit down beside yourself. And in that quiet space, remember this: rest is not something you must earn before receiving. It is a natural part of life, like nightfall after a long day, like the breath returning after too many moments of bracing yourself. Number 8, the fear of burdening the person you love. And when a person has become used to placing conditions even on their right to rest, they often enter love with a very quiet hesitation. It is not that they do not know how to love. Usually it is the opposite. They love deeply and attentively, and they are very afraid of making the other person sad. But precisely because love matters so much, they do not dare to let their own needs appear too clearly. They fear that a long message will feel heavy to the other person. They fear that one vulnerable day will make the other person tired. They fear that if they honestly say they need to be listened to, the person they love will feel pulled into something troublesome. And so, In the very place where a human being should be allowed to soften, they quietly keep themselves light, neat, and easy to love. The fear of burdening the person one loves often does not take the shape of fear. It looks like sensitivity, like a very gentle kind of being, considerate. That person may want to call, but then they look at the time and stop. They may be sad for a long while, but when asked, they only say, "I'm just a little tired." They may need to be held, but they fear that this need will make the other person feel demanded of. They do not want to become the person who brings dark clouds into someone else's day. They also do not want love to have to pause in order to take care of a wound they believe belongs only to them. And so, they learn to love by minimizing themselves, minimizing their sadness, minimizing their desires, minimizing even the truth in their own heart. In Kazuo Ishiguro's novel, Never Let Me Go, Kathy H. is a character with a very quiet kind of composure. She is the narrator, a 31-year-old carer who has taken care of donors for many years, and her memories bring the reader back to Hailsham, the school where she grew up with Ruth and Tommy. The world of the novel does not reveal everything directly from the beginning, but little by little we understand that those children were created to donate organs and that their future has almost already been decided. In that setting, Kathy appears as someone who always remembers, always cares, always observes, yet tells the story of her life in a voice so restrained that it hurts. Never Let Me Go is Ishiguro's 2005 novel, set in an alternative England and centered on Kathy, Ruth, Tommy, and their fate after their childhood at Hailsham. What makes Kathy haunting is not that she lacks love. She has love, but that love often passes through many silences. She cares for others with an almost instinctive endurance. She holds memories, pain, and even the things that cannot be changed. With Tommy, their love arrives late, in a small and fragile stretch of time. They once hoped that they might be granted a deferral from donation if they could prove that they truly loved each other, only to discover that this rumor was not true. The pain here is not only a cruel fate. The pain also lies in the way these people have grown used to living in a world that does not allow their desires to carry their full weight. They love, but as if they still have to keep that love within the boundaries of a life that has never made room for them. Kathy makes us think of people in real life who are very good at caring for others, but very clumsy when they need to be cared for. They may remember what the other person likes or dislikes, whether that person is tired today, or which sentence will make them feel more at ease. But when they themselves are sad, they do not know where to place that sadness. They have become so used to being easy to be around that they forget intimacy does not only require pleasantness, intimacy also requires truth. And truth is not always neat. Truth may be a tired heart, a desire to come closer, a loneliness very difficult to put into words. From Jung's perspective, this fear is the trace of a split within the soul. One part of us longs to bond, to be seen, to enter a relationship without having to make ourselves smaller. But another part stands guard very strictly, always reminding us not to need too much, not to speak too honestly, not to let anyone see that we are hoping to be held. And so a person enters love as though carrying two different rhythms in their steps. One rhythm wants to move closer, the other is already preparing to retreat. They are not cold. They only learned very early that in order to remain in love, They had to make their presence as light as possible. Carl Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." A true meeting cannot touch only the edited surface of who we are. If love only meets the version of us that is always fine, always easy, always self-sufficient, then that love is still standing outside the threshold. Intimacy begins when two people dare to affect each other with their truth, not in order to turn each other into a container for every burden, but to give each other the chance to be present in the places that are not yet perfect. You can imagine the fear of burdening the person you love as someone sitting by a river, holding a small paper boat in their hands. On that little boat are very real things: a sad day, a longing, a wish to hear one gentle sentence, a moment of weakness that has nowhere to go. The river leads to the person they love, but they keep holding the boat in their hands, afraid that if they let it go, it will disturb the water, make the other person bend down to pick it up, and make the existing peace become troublesome. And so the boat never travels. The true things never arrive. And the person on the other bank may still be standing there, not because they do not want to receive it, but because they never knew there was a boat being held back for so long. This fear makes people love by turning down the volume of themselves. They do not lie completely, but they rarely speak fully honestly. They replace a large pain with a very light sentence. They replace a wish to be near someone with politeness. They replace a need for reassurance with the thought that they should be more mature. Over time, love may remain calm, but it no longer becomes deep enough. The other person sees them as fine, because they always present themselves as someone fine. But inside, they may feel lonely even within their own relationship, not because they are not loved, but because they have never allowed love to know exactly where inside them they need to be touched. What needs to be distinguished here is that need is not the same as burden. A healthy relationship is not a place where we pour our entire life onto another person. But it is also not a place where we must behave as though we never need anyone. Mature love has boundaries, but it is not cold. It has responsibility, but it does not force human beings to always be clean, tidy, and easy to handle. When a person dares to share honestly, they are not breaking love. They are giving love a chance to become more real. A chance for the other person not only to love the edited version, but also to meet the living part, trembling, needing, learning how to trust. So, my friend, if you recognize that you too have loved with that kind of hesitation, if you have held back so much simply because you feared your heart would become too heavy for someone else, begin gently. Not by forcing yourself to open up immediately, but with one honest sentence that is just enough. Today I feel a little unsteady, and I want to be near you for a while. A sentence like that does not force anyone to save you, nor does it place love under an unbearable weight. It only opens a small space for the other person to know where you are. And sometimes, that small space is where love begins to become more real, no longer a place where you must keep holding the paper boat forever, but a place where you can slowly learn to let your sincere truths drift toward the person you love. Number 9. The adult outside, the child within. Right here, when love does not respond in the way we hope, a very deep truth may appear. There are people who, on the outside, are fully grown adults, but inside, they carry a frightened child. They may be very capable at work, very sensible in relationships, very rational when analyzing other people's problems. They may speak maturely, make clear decisions, care for their families, fulfill responsibilities, and live like adults in every visible sense. But all it takes is a long silence after an argument, a gaze turning cold, a sentence left unexplained, and inside, they may immediately return to a very old age. The adult is still sitting there, but the child in the heart has already begun to ask, "Am I about to be left behind?" In a Jungian-oriented therapy session, I once met a young woman named Helen. From the outside, Helen was the kind of person everyone would assume was fine. She had a good job, spoke calmly, knew how to organize her life, knew how to take care of others, and always tried to keep everything under control. She entered the therapy room with her familiar calmness, telling her story clearly, almost without complaint. But that day, when she spoke about an argument with her husband the night before, her voice suddenly slowed. Not because the argument was especially serious. It had only begun from a small misunderstanding in daily life. But afterwards, her husband remained silent for a long time. He did not scold her, did not leave, did not say anything especially harsh. He simply did not comfort her, did not return to her, did not take the initiative to make peace in the way Helen had hoped. Helen said that the adult part of her understood the situation was not serious. She understood that everyone sometimes needs their own space. She understood that her husband might also have been hurt and not known how to speak. But in her body, that silence was not small at all. The longer she waited, the more her chest tightened. She wanted to move closer, but she was afraid she would be a burden. She wanted to ask, "Do you still love me?" But that sentence felt too childish. She was lying beside her husband in the same room, but inside, she felt as though she were standing outside a closed door. When the therapist asked, "In that moment, which part of you is hurting the most?" Helen was silent for a long time. Then she said, "Not the 32-year-old wife. A little child who does not know how to make the adults come back." That sentence opens the true center of this part. The adult outside Helen is not fake. She truly is capable, truly understanding, truly thoughtful. But adult competence does not automatically heal the childlike part once abandoned in emotion. A person may have grown in age, yet in certain very specific situations, their soul still reacts from a place much older than the present. Reason says, this is only an argument. But the child hears another message. Love is being withdrawn. The other person is no longer there. I must do something immediately to become safe again. Carl Jung once wrote, "The child is the potential future." Hence, the occurrence of the child motif in the psychology of the individual signifies, as a rule, an anticipation of future developments. This reminds us that the child within does not belong only to the past, but also carries a capacity for development that has not yet been lived. That child may still be afraid, may still need care, but it also preserves the innocence, trust, and vitality that the adult within us has lost. When that part is recognized, we not only understand why we once hurt, but we also begin to see another way of living opening before us. You can imagine a human being as an old piano. On the outside, the wood may have been polished, the keys aligned, and the sound still able to carry adult, composed melodies. But inside, a few strings were tightened too much a long time ago. All it takes is one note touching the right frequency, and the whole body of the instrument vibrates more strongly than expected. not because the piano is broken, but because an old string has never been tuned again. The adults outside are the same. They may function very well in most areas of life. But when the present touches the exact frequency of the past, the child within may ring out with all the fear of long ago. This explains why some of our reactions are not proportionate to the present. A lover's silence for a few hours can make us feel as though we have been abandoned. A gentle comment can make us feel not good enough. One time when someone does not comfort us can make a whole night feel cold. Outsiders may say, "It's just a small thing." But in the inner world, it is not small at all for the part that has been touched. The adult within us understands the context. The child within us remembers only the feeling. And a feeling, if it has never been held, often returns as intact as the day it was born. In Jungian psychology, the journey of maturity is not about eliminating that childlike part in order to become tougher. On the contrary, it is about learning to build a new relationship with it. If the adult within turns away, the child will continue calling through intense reactions, sudden fears, and needs for reassurance so strong that even we feel ashamed of them. But if the adult within can turn back and say, "Ah, this is the small part of me that is afraid," something very different begins to happen. We are no longer completely swept away by emotion. We can feel the fear while still keeping a little of the present. We can recognize that we are hurt while not leaving that child alone to decide everything. Helen began with something very small like that. Instead of messaging her husband in panic or forcing herself to stay silent until she went numb, she practiced naming what was happening inside. "There is a part of me that feels very afraid when you are silent for too long." That sentence is different from blame. It does not say, "You are making me suffer." It also does not pretend, "I am fine." It simply places a truth on the table, gentle enough not to attack, honest enough not to betray herself. And that way of speaking helps the adult outside her begin to care for the child within, instead of letting that child either scream inside or be locked away in silence. What is precious about the child within is that it does not only carry wounds, it also holds the softest things in human beings: the capacity to trust, the capacity to rejoice, the capacity to love with innocence, the capacity to long for closeness without calculation. If we see it only as a troublesome part, we will continue to miss a very precious source of life. That child does not need to be given the right to drive the whole life, but it also does not deserve to be imprisoned only because it is still afraid. It needs an adult who is steady enough to listen, clear enough to set boundaries, and gentle enough not to mock the things it once could not bear. Perhaps what we need to carry here is one very important distinction. You are not the activated child, but that child is a part of you that needs care. When a silence, a comment, or a moment of being forgotten hurts you more than you think is reasonable, do not rush to conclude that you are weak. Try stepping back for one breath and recognizing this. Perhaps the adult of today has touched a feeling from long ago, and simply by staying with that part kindly, you have already begun doing what it has waited for so long, not abandoning it one more time. If you know someone who always appears very fine, very mature, and rarely says they need to be comforted, share this video with them gently. Not to say that they have a problem, but as a warm reminder, perhaps behind that strong adult, there is still a child longing to be understood. And sometimes, a video that arrives at the right time can become a small chair in the inner room, where someone sits down with themselves for the first time without feeling ashamed that they are still in pain. Number 10. The exhaustion of the always independent person. The moment a person realizes that inside them there is still a child who needs to be comforted, they also begin to see the cost of having been independent for too long. Independence is not wrong. It is a necessary part of growing up. A person needs to know how to stand on their own feet, take responsibility for their life, and not place all their peace in someone else's hands. But there is a kind of independence that does not arise from freedom. It arises from the fact that a child once had no other choice. That child was not independent because they were stronger than other children. They were independent because, at a very early point, they learned that if they did not take care of themselves, there was no certainty that anything would be taken care of for them. After the previous therapy session, Helen began to recognize this more clearly. She was not only hurt because her husband had been silent after an argument, but because that silence immediately sent her back into the habit of managing everything alone. At home, she was often the one who cooked, bathed the child, prepared school clothes, remembered school payment deadlines, noticed what was left in the refrigerator, whether the child was coughing, and who in the family seemed uncomfortable. She did not complain. She simply did it, so quickly that others gradually came to think everything had naturally been arranged that way. When her husband asked why she did not say anything, Helen only smiled and said, "I'm used to it." But behind that sentence was not only the exhaustion of a wife, it was also the reflex of a child who once believed that if she did not remember, do, and keep everything steady herself, no one would truly carry it with her. Helen did not hold everything because she wanted to prove she was capable. She was simply not used to letting anyone enter the heaviest part with her. Whenever her husband offered to help, she often said, "It's okay, I'll do it faster." But in therapy, she gradually realized that this sentence was not only about speed, it was about the fear of having to wait, having to remind, having to be disappointed if the other person forgot what she needed. For Helen, independence was no longer simply the ability to live autonomously. It was the way the child inside her avoided being disappointed again. Carl Jung once wrote, "Loneliness does not come from having no one, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself." Sometimes they are not lonely because there is no one beside them. They are lonely because the most important things are the very things they do not know how to say. They may live in a family, have people who love them, share meals, have daily conversations, and still feel that a region inside them has been left separate. In that loneliness, there is not only an adult who does not know how to open their mouth. There is also a child within who once learned that the important things inside them should not be spoken about too much. You can imagine excessive independence as someone always keeping their hands on the steering wheel, even after the car has already entered a safer road. At first, this helped them survive. When the road was dark, when no one gave directions, when every turn could lead to danger, they had to stay alert, look far ahead, and decide quickly on their own. But many years later, even when someone is sitting beside them, even when the road is no longer as rough as before, their hands still grip the steering wheel tightly. They do not dare to let go for even a second. They do not dare to let anyone take a turn, They do not dare to believe they can sit in the passenger seat and the car will still keep moving. Outsiders see that they are in control, but no one knows that their wrists have been tired for a very long time. The always independent person is the same. They encourage themselves, analyze themselves, repair themselves, lift themselves up. They rarely trouble anyone, rarely wait for anyone, rarely allow anyone to be responsible for them. But the cost is that they always keep one part of themselves tense inside. Even when someone is beside them, they do not fully rest. They still prepare a plan in case the other person cannot help. Still think through solutions in advance. Still keep the heaviest part for themselves. For the child who had to grow up too early, leaning on someone is not simply an action, it is a risk. It means giving another person the chance to disappoint them, and that childlike part is already too tiring to relearn how to wait. This makes them very easy to misunderstand. Other people see that they are strong, so they assume they do not need support. They see them silently handling everything, so they assume they prefer it that way. They see that they rarely ask, so they assume they have no needs. But in truth, many people who are excessively independent are not people who do not want help. They simply do not know how to receive help without feeling weakened. They do not know how to say, "Can you help me?" without feeling as though they are placing a debt on someone else's shoulders. They do not know how to be cared for without immediately thinking about how they must repay it. Helen once said in a therapy session, "I am not tired because of one specific task. I am tired because there is always a list in my head." That list is not only housework or work, it is also a list of emotions to manage, situations to anticipate, and things to remember, so no one will be disappointed. That sentence goes straight to the core of excessive independence. Exhaustion does not only come from doing too much, it comes from the feeling that there is nowhere to put anything down. A person can lie on a couch all afternoon and still be exhausted if inside. They still believe that everything will ultimately remain their responsibility. A person can be loved and still feel lonely if the child inside them has not yet believed that love can share a burden without disappearing. For Helen, change did not begin with one huge conversation. It began with practicing not to refuse help too quickly. When her husband asked whether she needed him to do anything, she no longer immediately said, "No need." She paused for a few seconds, swallowed the familiar reflex, and tried saying something very specific. "Can you bathe our child tonight?" That was all. But for someone who had grown used to doing everything before anyone had a chance to notice, that sentence felt like the first time she took her hands off the steering wheel for a short stretch of road, allowing the person beside her to learn how to steer with her. It gave her body a new experience. I can use a little, and everything does not collapse. I can ask for a little help, and love does not disappear. Perhaps what needs to be recognized here is that this independence was once the place where the child inside you survived. It once helped you stand firm when no one had taught you how to learn. But what once protected a child does not necessarily need to continue directing the entire life of an adult. You have the right to feel grateful to the part that helped you pass through difficult years, but you also have the right to let that part rest. Not everyone who enters your life can carry things with you, and not every offer of help is safe enough to receive. But if there is someone who has stayed many times with kindness, you can try opening a very small space. not handing your whole life to them, only letting one very tired corner of you be placed beside another person. Because in the end, the most beautiful independence is not needing anyone. The most beautiful independence is when you are steady enough not to lose yourself in another person, and soft enough not to lose another person, simply because you are afraid of needing them. One day, you may still be someone who knows how to stand on your own feet, still knows how to care for your own life, still knows how to pass through difficult stretches. But you no longer have to walk as though you are the only person in the world holding the map. There may be a hand walking beside you, not to pull you forward in your place, but simply to remind you that you do not need to brace yourself through everything in order to be worthy of love. If a person has been used to taking care of everything on their own for too long, then when someone truly cares for them, they may not immediately feel relieved, but confused. This may sound strange, but for a child who had to grow up too fast, care is not always a familiar place. A hand reaching toward them may warm their heart, but it may also make them tense. A sentence like, "Let me take care of this," may move them, but at the same time, make them want to step back. Not because they do not need love, but because the childlike part within them had once learned that receiving care was uncertain. And the more one expects, the more easily one can be hurt. People who find it hard to receive care usually do not refuse in an obvious way. They refuse very gently, very skillfully, sometimes so subtly that even they do not realize it. When someone asks if they need help, they say, "It's okay, I can do it." When someone wants to buy them a small gift, they quickly say, "Don't waste your money." When someone cares a little more deeply, they feel their heart soften, but then change the subject so the moment does not become too intimate. They may care for others very naturally, but when love turns toward them, they do not know where to stand inside that tenderness. They are grateful, but they also feel indebted. They are loved, but they do not know how to remain still inside the feeling of being loved. In the Bible, there is a scene both beautiful and deeply human in the Gospel of John, in which Jesus washes the feet of his disciples. When it is Simon Peter's turn, he immediately reacts, "You shall never wash my feet." Peter does not refuse because he hates being cared for. He refuses because he cannot bear the thought of his teacher bending down before the dusty, lowest, most shameful part of him. In that story, the washing of feet is not only an act of service, it is also a very deep symbol. To truly enter love, human beings must not only learn how to give, but they must also learn how to allow themselves to be touched, cleansed and cared for in the place where they feel least worthy. Peter makes us think of many people who had to grow up too quickly. They may serve, help, and worry about others without feeling awkward. But when it is their turn to have someone bend down and care for them, they become confused. Because receiving care means allowing someone else to see that they are not completely fine, not completely able to handle everything alone, not completely strong like the image they have always maintained. It reveals the part that needs support, the part that has been hidden very carefully behind independence. And that very part is what makes them both long for care and fear it. Some people are not afraid of love in the usual sense. They are afraid of the moment love comes too close and sees exactly the place they once learned to cover. Carl Jung once wrote, "The acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem and the epitome of a whole outlook upon life." For someone who finds it hard to receive care, accepting oneself does not only mean accepting the strong, kind, useful parts. It also means accepting the part that needs help, the tired part, the part that does not know how to manage everything alone, the part that wants someone to stay without having to pay for it with perfection. Sometimes, the hardest thing is not loving someone else. The hardest thing is believing that we ourselves are also worthy of receiving a love that does not have to be immediately repaid. From Jung's perspective, difficulty receiving care is often a sign of an ego that has identified for too long with the image of the fine one. The fine one does not need anyone to hold them up. The fine one handles things alone. The fine one becomes grateful quickly, gives back quickly, and does not let anyone worry. But beneath that image, there may be a child who once understood that their needs would only be accepted if they were not too large. And so when someone truly cares, that child does not immediately relax. It looks around. It wonders whether this care comes with conditions, whether it will last, and whether it will disappear if they need it one more time. It is not doubt, because it is ungrateful. It doubts, because it once had to learn not to trust too quickly. You can imagine this as someone who has grown used to locking the door from the inside every night. For years, they've learned to check the lock, pull the curtains, dim the lights, and sit alone in their room to make sure no one can come in and hurt them. That room may be lonely, but at least it is familiar. Then one day someone does not break the door, does not force them to open it, but simply stands outside and gently leaves a small lamp, a warm meal, a note saying, "You do not have to come out right away. I just wanted to leave this here for you." To another person, that is a tender gesture, but to someone used to protecting themselves, even tenderness can make them confused. They do not know whether they should open the door. They do not know whether receiving that lamp means they owe something. They do not know whether, if they let the other person see the room inside, they will still be respected. And it is right there that we understand why receiving care can be so difficult. It is not only receiving a meal, a question of concern, or a small act of help. It is allowing someone to come closer to the place we have hidden very carefully. It is allowing someone else to know that we also sometimes feel hungry, cold, tired, and unable to do everything on our own. For someone who has to mature too early, care can awaken two feelings at the same time. On one side, the deep longing to learn. On the other, the fear that if they learn, they will lose control, lose safety, or be disappointed one more time. That is why, when they are cared for, they may react in ways that are hard for others to understand. They say, "No need," before they have had a chance to feel what they truly need. They make light of the other person's kindness with a joke. They immediately want to return it, make up for it, and prove that they are not only receiving. Not because they are cold. Sometimes they are so moved that they do not know how to remain still inside that emotion. Care touches a very deep lack within them. And when someone has grown used to deprivation, receiving something kind can hurt in a very strange way. It hurts because it is warm. It hurts because it arrives late. It hurts because they realize how much they needed this long ago. The important thing is not to force yourself to receive every form of care immediately. A person who grew up too fast needs to relearn the ability to receive through small steps. Not every hand that reaches out is safe. Not every form of care is pure. But if there is someone who has shown up many times with kindness, you can try not to refuse too quickly. When someone asks, "Let me help," pause for one breath before saying no. When someone cares for you through one small thing, try simply saying thank you without rushing to repay it right away. When someone asks whether you are tired, try letting your answer become a little more honest. Not to become dependent, but to allow the heart to taste a new experience. Receiving can also be safe. Perhaps the gentlest thing here is this: being cared for does not make you smaller. It only touches the small part in you that was once forgotten. And that part is not shameful. A mature person is not someone who never needs to be held up. A mature person is someone who knows when they can stand and when they need to let someone come a little closer. Like Peter in the moment when he had to learn how to let another person wash his feet, sometimes the soul also needs to learn a very humble lesson. Love is not only found in bending down to care for others, but also in trusting enough to allow ourselves to be cared for in return. Number 11. Why they find it hard to receive care. If a person has been used to taking care of everything on their own for too long, then when someone truly cares for them, they may not immediately feel relieved but confused. This may sound strange, but for a child who had to grow up too fast, care is not always a familiar place. A hand reaching toward them may warm their heart, but it may also make them tense. A sentence like, "Let me take care of this," may move them, but at the same time, make them want to step back. Not because they do not need love, but because the childlike part within them once learned that receiving care was uncertain. And the more one expects, the more easily one can be hurt. People who find it hard to receive care usually do not refuse in an obvious way. They refuse very gently, very skillfully, sometimes so subtly that even they do not realize it. When someone asks if they need help, they say, "It's okay, I can do it." When someone wants to buy them a small gift, they quickly say, "Don't waste your money." When someone cares a little more deeply, they feel their hearts soften, but then change the subject so the moment does not become too intimate. They may care for others very naturally, but when love turns toward them, they do not know where to stand inside that tenderness. They are grateful, but they also feel indebted. They are loved, but they do not know how to remain still inside the feeling of being loved. In the Bible, there is a scene both beautiful and deeply human. In the Gospel of John, Jesus washes the feet of his disciples. When it is Simon Peter's turn, he immediately reacts, "You shall never wash my feet." Peter does not refuse because he hates being cared for. He refuses because he cannot bear the thought of his teacher bending down before the dusty, lowest, most shameful part of him. In that story, the washing of feet is not only an act of service, it is also a very deep symbol to truly enter love. Human beings must not only learn how to give, they must also learn how to allow themselves to be touched, cleansed, and cared for in the place where they feel least worthy. Peter makes us think of many people who had to grow up too quickly. They may serve, help, and worry about others without feeling awkward. But when it is their turn to have someone bend down and care for them, they become confused. Because receiving care means allowing someone else to see that they are not completely fine, not completely able to handle everything alone, not completely strong like the image they have always maintained. It reveals the part that needs support, the part that has been hidden very carefully behind independence. And that very part is what makes them both long for care and fear it. Some people are not afraid of love in the usual sense. They are afraid of the moment love comes too close and sees exactly the place they once learned to cover. Carl Jung once wrote, "The acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem and the epitome of a whole outlook upon life." For someone who finds it hard to receive care, accepting oneself does not only mean accepting the strong, kind, useful parts. It also means accepting the part that needs help, the tired part, the part that does not know how to manage everything alone, the part that wants someone to stay without having to pay for it with perfection. Sometimes, the hardest thing is not loving someone else. The hardest thing is believing that we ourselves are also worthy of receiving a love that does not have to be immediately repaid. From Jung's perspective, difficulty receiving care is often a sign of an ego that has identified for too long with the image of the fine one. The fine one does not need anyone to hold them up. The fine one handles things alone. The fine one becomes grateful quickly, gives back quickly, and does not let anyone worry. But beneath that image, there may be a child who once understood that their needs would only be accepted if they were not too large. And so when someone truly cares, that child does not immediately relax. It looks around. It wonders whether this care comes with conditions, whether it will last, whether it will disappear if they need it one more time. It is ungrateful. It doubts, because it once had to learn not to trust too quickly. You can imagine this as someone who has grown used to locking the door from the inside every night. For years, they have learned to check the lock, pull the curtains, dim the lights, and sit alone in their room to make sure no one can come in and hurt them. That room may be lonely, but at least it is familiar. Then one day, someone does not break the door, does not force them to open it, but simply stands outside and gently leaves a small lamp, a warm meal, a note saying, "You do not have to come out right away. I just wanted to leave this here for you." To another person, that is a tender gesture. But to someone used to protecting themselves, even tenderness can make them confused. They do not know whether they should open the door. They do not know whether receiving that lamp means they owe something. They do not know whether, if they let the other person see the room inside, they will still be respected. And it is right there that we understand why receiving care can be so difficult. It is not only receiving a meal, a question of concern, or a small act of help. It is allowing someone to come closer to the place we have hidden very carefully. It is allowing someone else to know that we also sometimes feel hungry, cold, tired, and unable to do everything on our own. For someone who has to mature too early, care can awaken two feelings at the same time. On one side, the deep longing to learn. On the other, the fear that if they learn, they will lose control, lose safety, or be disappointed one more time. That is why, when they are cared for, they may react in ways that are hard for others to understand. They say, "No need," before they have had a chance to feel what they truly need. They make light of the other person's kindness with a joke. They immediately want to return it, make up for it, prove that they are not only receiving. Not because they are cold. Sometimes they are so moved that they do not know how to remain still inside that emotion. Care touches a very deep lack within them. And when someone has grown used to deprivation, receiving something kind can hurt in a very strange way. It hurts because it is warm. It hurts because it arrives late. It hurts because they realize how much they needed this long ago. The important thing is not to force yourself to receive every form of care immediately. A person who grew up too fast needs to relearn the ability to receive through small steps. Not every hand that reaches out is safe. Not every form of care is pure. But if there is someone who has shown up many times with kindness, you can try not to refuse too quickly. When someone asks, "Let me help," pause for one breath before saying no. When someone cares for you through one small thing, try simply saying "thank you" without rushing to repay it right away. When someone asks whether you are tired, try letting your answer become a little more honest. Not to become dependent, but to allow the heart to taste a new experience. Receiving can also be safe. Perhaps the gentlest thing here is this: being cared for does not make you smaller. It only touches the small part in you that was once forgotten. And that part is not shameful. A mature person is not someone who never needs to be held up. A mature person is someone who knows when they can stand and when they need to let someone come a little closer. Like Peter in the moment when he had to learn how to let another person wash his feet. Sometimes the soul also needs to learn a very humble lesson. Love is not only found in bending down to care for others, but also in trusting enough to allow ourselves to be cared for in return. Number 12. The longing to be weak without being abandoned. When a person has spent too long not knowing how to receive care, what they long for most deeply is sometimes not for someone to solve their life. What they long for is to be weak without being left behind, to be tired without being seen as a burden, to cry without causing love to withdraw, to say, "I am not okay," without the other person immediately becoming uncomfortable, distant, or turning that truth into a reason to leave. For a child who grew up too fast, weakness is not only an emotion, it was once a risk. And so in adulthood, they may deeply want to soften, but fear that the moment they soften is also the moment someone sees too much and no longer wants to stay. In a workshop on emotional communication skills, I happened to meet James again, an old classmate. Back in school, James was the kind of person who was always cheerful, quick, present at the right moment, and knew how to make the atmosphere lighter. Many years later, when we met again, he still carried that same outer appearance, with a bright smile and a way of speaking that made others feel comfortable. During the workshop exercise, each person was invited to share one thing they often hid in relationships. James sat for a very long time without speaking. Then he smiled, the familiar kind of smile used to cover embarrassment, and said, "I think what I hide most is that I also want someone to comfort me. But I'm afraid that if I say it, people will think I'm too weak." The whole room fell silent for a moment. Not because that sentence was strange, but because it was too real. James said he could endure work pressure, stand up and handle family matters, and be the friend who listened to others until late at night. But when he himself was sad, he usually disappeared. He did not text, did not call anyone, did not let anyone see that he was struggling. If someone asked, he said he was fine. If someone showed concern, he joked it away. He said, "I am not afraid of being sad. I am afraid that when I am sad, people will not know what to do with me." That sentence goes straight into the heart of those who had to mature early. They are not only afraid of their own emotions, they are afraid that those emotions will confuse love, and then love will choose to leave. From Jung's perspective, the longing to be weak without being abandoned is the longing to be reunited with the human part that has been split off from the image of strength. A person who grew up too fast often identifies with the role of the fine one, the understanding one, the one who can take care of themselves. But beneath that role, there is still a very soft, very needy, very human part. That part does not disappear simply because we refuse to let it appear. It still lives in the moments when we want to be held, but say we do not need it, when we want to be asked about but act busy, when we want someone to notice that we are tired but continue behaving as though everything is under control. Carl Jung once wrote, "There is no birth of consciousness without pain. For those who are used to being strong, that pain sometimes begins the moment they realize they no longer want to brace themselves. They no longer want to turn every sadness into something small. They no longer want to always be the understanding one first. They no longer want to have to be completely fine before they are loved. That realization may hurt, but it also opens a door back to the vulnerable part that was once left behind in order to survive." You can imagine that longing as someone who has stood on a stage for too long. Under the lights, they know how to smile, how to hold a steady posture, how to play the role of the person who is always fine. But behind the stage, all they wish for is someone who can see them when their makeup has blurred and still say gently, "You can be here too. You don't have to perform anymore." For those who had to grow up too quickly, the deepest love is not the love that only applauds when they are strong, but the love that still recognizes them when they no longer have the strength to shine. But in order to be weak, they must pass through a very old fear. If I am no longer useful, cheerful, and stable, am I still lovable? That fear makes them censor even their own fragility. They only cry when they are alone, only say they are tired after everything has been done, only ask for help when there is no other choice. And so their weakness is rarely allowed to be fully lived. It always has to step out with a watchful part standing guard behind it. This does not mean we should place all our emotions on someone else's shoulders. Healthy vulnerability is not letting someone save us from every pain. It is the ability to be honest about where we are while still remaining responsible for ourselves. It is being able to say, "I am very sad," without turning the other person into the only one who must heal us. It is being able to let someone stay beside us, not because we cannot live without them, but because there are moments when human beings need to be witnessed in their tenderness. A mature relationship does not remove boundaries, but it also does not force the heart to always stand at attention like a soldier. James said that after the workshop, the hardest thing for him was not understanding the problem. He had understood it for a long time. The hard part was trying to live differently in one real moment. One evening, instead of disappearing as he usually did, he sent his partner one very short message. "Today I feel vulnerable. I just want you to be beside me for a little while." He said that after sending it, he immediately wanted to take the message back. His body tightened as if he had just done something dangerous. But his partner did not blame him. She only replied, "I'm here." James told the story very softly, but his eyes reddened. Perhaps it was not because the reply was so grand. It was because, for the first time, A very small part of him was allowed to weaken, and the world did not collapse. That is the kind of healing experience many people who grew up too fast need to have, not once, but many times. The nervous system does not relearn safety through theory alone. It learns through concrete moments, when you speak a little truth, and the other person still stays, when you cry and are not criticized, when you are not okay and love does not disappear, when you are no longer perfect and are still treated with respect. Each experience like that is like a new thread woven into an old tear in the soul. It does not make the past disappear, but it makes the present no longer completely ruled by the past. Tomorrow morning after waking up, try beginning with one very small thing. Before stepping into the role of the strong one, the responsible one, the one who has to take care of everything, place your hand on your chest and whisper, "Today I do not need to be tough in every moment." During the day, if a soft emotion appears, do not rush to push it down. Simply name it gently, "I am feeling hurt. I need to be close to someone. I am tired." You do not have to tell the whole world. Just do not abandon yourself the moment your vulnerable part appears. So perhaps what we need to learn is not how to become fragile with everyone, but how to recognize where it is safe enough that we do not have to be strong forever. Being weak without being abandoned is not a luxurious privilege. It is a deeply human need. And if long ago you had to hide your tears to keep everything steady, may you gradually meet people today who do not require you to disappear from your pain in order to deserve love. Leave one short word, whole, as a gentle reminder that you do not have to cut off your vulnerable part in order to be loved. Only when that fragile part is also seen and allowed to remain do you begin to return to your own wholeness. Number 13. Meeting again the forgotten inner child. And when a person begins to understand that they can be weak without being abandoned, they also begin to hear a very quiet call from within, the call of the forgotten inner child. That is not only the part that hurts, the part that fears, the part that once had to brace itself in order to survive. It is also the part that once knew how to rejoice over very small things, once felt curious about the world, once wanted to play, to ask, to be held, to be surprised, to live without constantly measuring whether it was disturbing anyone. Meeting that childlike part again does not mean returning to the past in order to remain forever in sadness. It means returning in order to bring one part of ourselves out of the place where it has been left for too long. I once knew a designer living in Portland, Oregon. Her name was Mia. Mia's work was very creative, but the way she lived always seemed tightly controlled. She designed book covers, logos, and beautiful, refined brand identities. Her desk was always neat, pens placed exactly where they belonged, sticky notes arranged by color, her schedule filled in every box. Others looking at her would think Mia was an organized, professional, reliable artist. But once, in a conversation after a small exhibition, she said to me, "I still do creative work every day, but I feel as if the child in me, who once drew just for joy, has been silent for a very long time." That sentence opened something very deep. Mia said that when she was young, she loved drawing imaginary animals, houses with windows that could speak, and purple skies. She did not draw in order to be praised, not to create a product, not to please anyone. She drew because her hand wanted to follow colors, because her imagination was still allowed to wander. But as she grew older, She learned that everything had to be useful, had to be beautiful by the right standard, had to be recognized, and had to be good enough not to be laughed at. The innocent drawings gradually disappeared, replaced by achievements, portfolios, clients, deadlines, and designs that had to satisfy others. She still created beauty, but she no longer played with beauty. From the perspective of Jungian psychology, the inner child is not only a personal memory, it is also a symbol of life that wants to continue developing. That child carries within it the capacity to begin again, the capacity for wonder, the capacity for imagination, and also an invitation for the human being to return to wholeness. When a child has to grow up too fast, the childlike part does not die. It is simply split off from conscious life. The adult continues to function, continues to work, continues to complete responsibilities, but joy, softness, spontaneity, and innocence become unfamiliar. They are still alive, but sometimes they live as though they have forgotten a very private color of their own soul. Carl Jung once wrote, "The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct acting from inner necessity." At some point, healing is no longer about trying to analyze every wound with reason, but about returning to ourselves the aliveness that was once forgotten. That childlike part does not come back only to remind us of what hurt. It also comes to reopen the place where we know how to play, trust, be curious, and feel joy over very small things. From there, a new human being is not created through bracing, but through allowing the life inside to soften and move again. You can imagine the forgotten inner child as an old song we once knew by heart, but have not sung for a very long time. Long ago, that melody came naturally, in moments of joy over small things. But then, life became more serious. We learned to say what needed to be said, do what needed to be done, and hold ourselves just enough not to disturb anyone. That song did not disappear. It was only forgotten beneath many layers of responsibility. And sometimes, just one old color, one familiar scent, one afternoon that resembles the past, is enough to make it softly sound again, reminding us that the childlike part within us is still there, only waiting to be heard in our own true voice. Meeting the forgotten inner child again is not always peaceful. Sometimes we think we will only find innocence, but we also meet sadness. We reopen an old song and our eyes sting. We look at a toy in a store and suddenly remember something we badly wanted as a child, but never had. We try drawing, singing, dancing, doing something without a goal, and then feel awkward as if we are doing something wrong. That is very normal, because that child has been forgotten for too long. When met again, it may not run immediately into our arms. It may stand at a distance for a while, doubtful for a while, waiting to see whether this time the adult within us will truly stay. Mia began meeting her inner child again through something very small. She bought a cheap box of colored pencils at a store near her home, the kind she had loved as a child. At first, she felt silly. A professional designer sitting there coloring crooked circles on scrap paper. No brief, no client, no goal, no need for beauty. But after a few times, she noticed that her hand felt lighter. She was no longer trying to create a product. She was simply letting color pass through her. One day she drew a fish flying over a rooftop. Another day she filled an entire page with a very clumsy blue. She said, "I feel as if a very old part of me is breathing again." What matters here is that the inner child does not need us to do anything grand to prove that we have healed. It needs small but steady signs that it is remembered. A walk without counting steps. A food once loved in childhood. An old comic book. An afternoon when a hobby is not turned into an achievement. A moment when we allow ourselves to laugh at something silly. These things are not trivial. For someone who has lived too long in the role of an adult, they are like small threads reconnecting the present life with a source of life that was once cut off. So meeting the child within does not mean becoming childish in the sense of being irresponsible. It means learning how to become alive again. The adult within still needs to know how to pay bills, keep promises, care for relationships, and face reality. But the child also needs permission to ask a strange question, choose an unreasonable color, take an afternoon just to watch the sky, feel joy over something that produces no result. When these two parts are no longer split apart, the human being becomes softer without becoming weaker, more joyful without becoming shallow, and more mature without losing life. If you want to begin, make it very simple. Tonight, remember one thing you loved as a child before life taught you to be more realistic. It doesn't have to be something grand. It may be drawing, singing, reading stories, folding paper, watching the rain, eating a very old familiar food, or walking without a destination. Then sometime this week, give 10 minutes to that thing, without taking a photo to prove it, without turning it into a goal, without judging whether you are doing it well. Just 10 minutes so the child within you knows that it has not been completely forgotten. And perhaps, when we meet that childlike part again, we will understand that healing is not only about hurting less. Healing is also about recovering the ability to feel joy. It is no longer seeing our innocence as something dangerous. It is looking at the child who was once left behind and saying with all the gentleness of the adult today, "I remember you now." The past may not change, but our relationship with the past can change. And when the forgotten inner child steps back into life, it does not pull us backwards into the old days. It brings with it a piece of light we lost on the road of having to grow up too quickly. Number 14. Becoming yourself after years of bracing. The journey of meeting the forgotten inner child does not only bring us back to what has hurt, it also opens a deeper question. After all the years of bracing, how will we live if we no longer have to abandon ourselves? Human beings often do not know what their true self is, and what is a survival reflex, what they truly want, and what they do only to avoid being blamed, abandoned, or becoming a burden. They have lived too long in the state of trying to be fine, trying to be understanding, trying to be strong, trying not to need anyone. That is why becoming oneself is not a sudden moment of illumination. It is a very slow process where we gradually realize, I was not born only to adapt to pain. There are very ordinary mornings when a person wakes up and still does everything as usual. They make coffee, check messages, prepare for work, and answer familiar questions in a normal voice. But inside, something has changed. They no longer want to say, "It's fine," too quickly. They no longer want to take on one more task, simply because they are afraid of disappointing someone. They no longer want to smile when their heart is actually tired. They stand before the mirror, look at their face after many years of trying, and suddenly realize that the person in the mirror is not unfamiliar because they have changed, but because they have been forgotten for too long. It may be a very quiet moment, but also a very large one, the moment a person begins to want to return to themselves. From Jung's perspective, becoming oneself does not mean creating a more perfect version to present to the world. It is the process of reclaiming the parts that have been split off from conscious life. The weak part, the angry part, the childlike part, the part that needs love, the part that knows joy, the part that knows how to say no, the part that no longer wants to perform in order to please others. A person who grew up too fast often thinks that maturity means eliminating those parts. But Jung gives us another way of seeing. Human beings do not become whole by cutting parts of themselves away. Human beings become whole by daring to meet again what was once pushed out of the light. Carl Jung once wrote, "Only what is really oneself has the power to heal." After all the years of trying to become more lovable, stronger, less troublesome, more useful, the thing with the deepest power to heal is not a new performance. It is the real part of us returning. It is when we no longer have to use obedience to exchange for love, no longer have to use independence to cover loneliness, no longer have to use calmness to bury emotion. Only what truly belongs to us can make the soul stop splitting in two. You can imagine the journey of becoming yourself as someone who has worn a shirt too tight for many years. At first, that shirt helped them look neat, proper, and aligned with everyone's expectations. It helped them pass through places that required control, obedience, strength. But the more they grow, the more the body inside needs space. The shoulders begin to ache, the breath shortens. Every movement must be careful. Outsiders still see a beautiful shirt, but the one wearing it knows they cannot spend their whole life in something that makes it hard to breathe. Becoming yourself is when you begin to loosen each button, not to destroy everything, but to give your real body room to breathe. This does not mean abandoning all responsibilities, all relationships, or living only according to passing emotions. Becoming yourself is not doing everything you want without thinking of anyone else. It is living from a truer place within. It is knowing when you are agreeing sincerely and when you are agreeing because you fear being disliked. It is knowing when your silence comes from peace and when your silence comes from not daring to be present. It is knowing when you are strong because you have chosen to be, and when you are strong because you do not believe anyone will stay if you weaken. That difference is very subtle, but it is also where freedom begins. People who have braced themselves for too long often fear that if they live more truthfully, they will disturb everything. And yes, some things will change. Some people may not be used to it when you begin speaking more clearly. Some relationships may sway slightly when you are no longer always easy to be around. Some old roles may no longer fit you. But that disturbance is not necessarily a loss. Sometimes it is life rearranging itself around a truer human being. If everything was once peaceful because you kept making yourself smaller, then that peace had a price. And perhaps at some point, the soul will no longer accept paying that price. There is a very ordinary image, a person sitting at dinner with family, hearing someone ask them for one more thing that they would normally accept immediately. Their mouths are almost ready to say, "Of course," but this time they stop. They feel their heartbeat quicken slightly, guilt rises, fear of disappointing others appears as well. But instead of automatically obeying the old reflex, they say very softly, "I can't do that today." That sentence is not big, not dramatic, No one applauds. But inside, something very deep has happened. For the first time, they did not abandon themselves in order to preserve someone else's comfort. Moments like that are where human beings relearn how to become themselves, not through grand declarations, but through small choices repeated again and again. Speaking a little more honestly, resting when already tired, receiving care without rushing to repay it, letting the childlike part be joyful, letting anger tell us where a boundary is, letting weakness appear in a safe place. Each time, we reclaim a small piece of ourselves from the years of bracing, and over time, those small pieces begin to form a fuller person. Not perfect, but real. In Jung's language, this is the journey toward wholeness. Not wholeness like a statue without cracks, but wholeness like a human being who dares to admit they contain many parts, light and dark, strong and weak, adult and child, reason and emotion, needing independence, and also needing love. When a person stops fighting themselves, they do not become more chaotic. They become more real. And that truth, though it may feel awkward at first, brings a very different kind of peace. A peace that does not come from everyone being pleased, but from no longer having to disappear from one's own life. And in the end, becoming yourself after years of bracing is not about denying all the versions of you that once helped you survive. The understanding child, the strong adult, the independent part, the calm part, the part that always tried to keep everything steady, all of them once protected you in the way they knew how. But a human life cannot be built only on endurance. At some point, you no longer need to ask whether you must be better, more capable, more lovable, or less troublesome in order to be loved. You only need to slowly return to one very gentle truth. I was not born to disappear from myself. I am allowed to remain in my own life as myself. When a child grows up too fast, they not only lose the innocent days of childhood, but they also lose the feeling that they can be loved, even when they are not yet understanding, not yet strong, not yet able to take care of everything alone. From very early on, they learn to put away their tears, shrink their needs, anticipate other people's emotions, then call that loneliness maturity. But through Carl Jung's lens, no part of the soul truly disappears. What was once pushed down still silently finds its way back, not to destroy your life, but to remind you that there is a very small part inside you still waiting to live at its rightful age. Healing is not returning in order to blame the past, nor is it denying the adult you have become. It is learning to descend into the deeper layers of yourself, where that child is still waiting to be seen. When the childlike part is heard, the adult within also becomes less lonely. You begin to understand that you can be strong without becoming hard, independent while still being supported, loving without shrinking yourself, resting without guilt, and living truthfully without losing love. So if there is one thing to carry with you after this video, perhaps it is this. You do not need to keep proving that you are fine just because long ago no one noticed that you were hurt. The childlike part within you has not disappeared. It is only waiting to be called home through patience and compassion. If this video helps you look at yourself more gently, please like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who always appears strong. Perhaps they also need to be reminded that they do not need to brace themselves any longer in order to be worthy of love.